Okay. Oh, it's green. I'm setting myself a timer. What a magical golden pair of a timer. For 20 minutes so I don't go too long today. Welcome to DavCat 43, conducting DavChat. It's a talk, it's a chat, it's politics. Today it's about we want God, the new Trump tweet of the day, but also referring to the lie that the Democrats didn't feature that part of the oath under God during their 4-day convention, that it was cut somehow, which is, of course, refuted with very clear evidence. Compilations abound on the internet of under God being said as part of that oath every day across the 4 days. I just want to draw people's attention to what I'm wearing, which is my K-Hive for Joe t-shirt. It just arrived. I can't take that timer. It's too noisy. I'm going to have to turn it off. Done. All right. So thank you so much for joining me. Lots of information to go through today. Still the besieged postal service, still the rampant lying, which will escalate, which will go up a notch with the RNC convention this week. Now we can expect, what can we expect? Some lies, some more lies, and a whole raft of Trump family members talking, which is so exciting because there's one Trump family member that has been doing a lot of talking on recorded conversations. Now in New York, you can record a conversation as long as you have the consent of one of the parties involved in the recording. So we have Donald Trump's most excellent clinical psychologist niece, Mary L. Trump, recording her aunt, Marianne Barry Trump, a judge who years ago did ask Trump for a favor, that he asked his friend, Nixon lawyer Roy Cohn, to put in a good word for him with Ronald Reagan when casting about for female judges or female candidates to appoint to the federal bench. And Marianne Barry Judge did get that appointment. And in the recordings, she can be heard dismissing her brother fairly severely and confirming Mary Trump's claim that he did not get into college by his own efforts, that he paid someone to sit the SAT exams for him, that she drove him all around New York trying to find him a college to get into. Hooray. Oh, wow. So Bob calmly told your Trump-loving neighbor some truth, and you thought his head was going to explode. He cut you off with his leaf blower after he yelled, "I'm not talking about that." Well, I feel like that's progress, and I'm so glad, Bob, because instead of saying fake news, I don't believe anything that you say, and laughing maliciously, he's distressed enough to say, I'm not talking about that. And that at least gives me hope that the effect of Trump's massive mismanagement of the economy and of the coronavirus pandemic, that it will suppress the Trump vote, that people might find it a bit harder to muster the enthusiasm. Although statistics are saying that Trump supporters are pretty enthused about voting for Trump and saving civilization from socialists, but independent voters who lean Republican, those people who are less enmeshed in the world of accepting Trump lies as fact, those people might be the ones who do find it a little bit more difficult to make their way into a polling booth and put a tick next to Trump's name. So yes, it's easy to upset people with facts when it causes so much cognitive dissonance for them, because the fascist leader has gone hard with the biggest untruths he can have, in the same way, although quantifiably different, but in the same way that religion goes hard with big constructs that aren't verifiable, but to garner and assemble group loyalty around something that only they believe. So Trump really does have a group of supporters assembled who are the only ones who believe that America is doing great. They're the only ones who believe that Trump is just managing things so well. You couldn't sleep at night because you hate upsetting people? Well, you did good, Bob. You were brave. I'm going to quote John Lewis to you and say, good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you for doing that. Conflict is hard, I know, particularly for conflict-avoidant people. Some people, like trolls, often relish engendering conflict and pushing through with it. But you don't like conflict, and yet you spoke up. I'm so proud. All right, now let's have a little look. This is another piece of good news, which is someone just writing to Jason Miller, who's being interviewed on Sunday chat shows. She says, hey, Jason Miller, you assume Texas is going with Trump? Yesterday in my veterinary waiting room in Red Midland, Texas, I was wearing a Beto t-shirt. Several people came up to me and said they voted for Trump 4 years ago, and now they are voting for Biden. So that was from the Meet the Press interview. But it looks like, oh no, he didn't talk to Stephanopoulos today, but we're just talking about that anyway, because Stephen Miller apparently went on Meet the Press being asked about how 3 out of 4 Trump campaign managers have been arrested and jailed, talking about how Stephen Bannon was also Trump's chief strategist at the White House until he was fired. And Jason Miller claimed that Trump is just good at attracting quality people. And of course, Stephen Miller is someone who slipped an abortifacient drug, meaning a drug that aborts children. He slipped it without consent into a milkshake that he gave his mistress. He has other, and that sent her to hospital. And I guess presumably aborted his child as well. Gosh, and Jason Miller's the only person Trump can still find to be a spokesperson for him other than Kellyanne Conway. Wow. Jason Miller also hasn't paid child support to his son through another former Republican operative, AJ Delgado, who's, he doesn't make court appearances. He's been asked to give his DNA sample and he hasn't yet. So he's under court order to produce his DNA. But here is Trump campaign advisor Jason Miller claiming that Democrats did not take action to fund the Postal Service. And George Stephanopoulos rebuts him, which is always nice to see. I like to celebrate the media when that's what they do.
Bernie Sanders right now, you heard him right there. He said the president was undermining democracy by defunding the Postal Service. How do you respond?
Well, I think, George, you hit the nail on the head when you asked Bernie Sanders what his plan was to go and fix this. And he punted to Nancy Pelosi, who, by the way, is on vacation. The entire House is taking August recess. They're not even here dealing with it. I think it's a little disingenuous for Bernie and the rest of the Democrats to be making so much noise on this. They weren't trying to do it in February or March or April or May. And this is something that just is popping up now. I think what really is going on here is they're trying to change the rules and try to institute something that normally takes 5 to 10 years to put in place and rush it through in only 5 to 10 weeks. I mean, the fact of the matter is we've seen universal mail-in voting has been a disaster. And to go and try to rush this, it'd be everyone.
Where's the rebuttal? Where's the rebuttal?
No, not at all. In fact, Mitt Romney is wrong, just like he was wrong in 2012. Maloney is the winner on that. We're still not sure. But even take a look at Nevada.
But let me just stop you right there, because when the votes are thrown out, that shows that the system is working. It shows that the votes, they could have been fraudulent, and that's exactly what's been happening in the Carolyn Maloney race, get taken out if indeed they don't meet the requirements.
But to carry on for 6.
Yay. That's good. All right. So at least I had to skip past some of it. It was too atrocious. But at least there was that rebuttal there as well about mail-in voting, saying if Jason Miller was citing an example of some ballots being thrown out because they were found to not meet the requirements, and that illustrates that there's standards. There's standards that are being upheld. And Bob said that I should have seen your Trump-supporting neighbor's face when you mentioned Obama and his pandemic plan. Well, that's something I'll get to as well, because I've been reading this Brookings Institute article called Racial Gaps in Hope, Ill-Being, and Deaths of Despair. And that reports that there's been a huge increase in premature deaths amongst white people without a college education who are middle-aged. And that is something that's behind the sharp decrease in longevity rates for the United States. And there's no way to explain it by economic standards. and this is because there's a disparity. Poor Black people are less likely to report stress than poor white people. Why are poor Black people more optimistic and less stressed than poor white people? I'm going to suggest that the phenomenon is the purposeful enculturation of a grievance culture amongst poor white people by organizations such as Fox News and the Sinclair Network, and they feel like they're losing status, and that's causing them stress, and they're attributing that. They're blaming that on their fellow Americans. And that's no way to live. That's correlated with poor heart health. And I think once, many months ago, I talked about that. That poor heart health was associated with being someone who exhibited racism and also with being on the receiving end of racism. So I'll do more of a prepared talk on that tomorrow. But just to remind you all that I have some thoughts on it. Why is 57? Okay. The Republican Party apparently check this out. 57% of Republicans think the level of death from the coronavirus is acceptable. This seems to be further evidence of a fascist plurality in the GOP. Sure does. Sure does. So for Democrats, only 10% of Democrats think the number of deaths from coronavirus in the US is acceptable. 33% of independents. So I'm going to guess that's 33% of independents that lean Republican. 67% of independents think it's not acceptable, 90% of Democrats, and 43% of Republicans. So yes, we have a job to do to get through to any remaining independents capable of engaging with evidence that there are differential levels of economic harm and social harm as a result of the coronavirus amongst different nations. So other nations, their GDP has taken a hit as a result of the virus, but the US's GDP has fallen the most. And Trump and the Federal Reserve are still orchestrating, pumping huge sums of money, trillions of dollars, into the stock exchange as a undeclared political campaign donation to Trump to pump up that stock market and make it look okay. And their efforts to pump it up has given investors this sense of irrational exuberance that is now self-perpetuating. They're like, yes, we are invincible. No harm to the economy, no virus can keep us down. We're going to keep buying stocks because that's just the level of resilience in the stock market is so high. It's not real resilience. It's Trump-funded. It's Federal Reserve Bank funded resilience. And they gave it that initial push by adding $1 trillion to the market through the purchase of corporate bonds. And the market's done the rest by going, wow, the stock market is for superheroes. We are impervious to death and destruction. But the good news is 43% of Republicans are less cult-like. And those 43% of Republicans are capable, perhaps, of being part of a normal society. It is good to be able to distinguish. And yeah, so the 57%, let's round it up to 60, are a big liability for us going forwards. Absolutely. Steve Bannon said that if just 5% of Republicans voted against Trump, that would mean he's finished, which is great to think about, that there are enough Republicans who support mask wearing, who might still at this point be saying, yay Trump, I encourage him to do well. I'm not going to detach myself from him. He still has my loyalty. Who might be at least on the precipice of entertaining doubts. If they support wearing masks, if they think the number of coronavirus deaths have been too high, that they might be going through a process of reconsidering. And that's 67% of Republicans who think, independents, who think the number of coronavirus deaths is too high. You mentioned this to his neighbor. He said, well, it's 401k. 92% of wealth is owned by the 10%. Well, yes, the stock market is not benefiting everyone. 401ks are going to go up for the moment, but they will lose a lot when it crashes. Whereas wealthy people who are able to jump in and out of the stock market at will, they will be able to shift out as they see the stock market begin to fall when it inevitably does. And I say inevitably through my eyes, inevitably, because the real world and the stock market have such a diversion at this moment that appears to be unsustainable and that appears to mimic the conditions before other significant crashes. They've just gone up so high, so irrationally, so quickly, they would appear to be setting themselves up for a fall. Hey, Mr. Ed, nice to see you. Have you seen my t-shirt? I'll show you in a second. But first, Bob's nephew's wife's grandmothers both died last weekend, one COVID and not sure of the other. They were both 94. Whew. Wow. I think the average number of years lost to coronavirus deaths is approximately 13 years. So perhaps they could have lived to be 105, but that is an average, and it certainly is a very unpleasant way in which to be taken from your family. She is devastated, your nephew's wife. Yeah, two at once. Both grandmothers dying in one weekend would be very hard. Thank you for acknowledging that I have a solid point to make about the aggrieved Republicans who have had a culture of grievance cultivated in them. I'll show you the article I'm talking about. It is important, and then I've got 4 minutes left to talk. Okay, so the article headline is Racial Gaps in Hope, Ill-Being, and Deaths of Despair. And when we see the phrase racial gaps, we're used to that talk being in reference usually to the suffering incurred by Black Americans who are on the target end of significant environmental, economic, social discrimination. But no, this is just about white people being sad. And I'll read you the beginning paragraph that says, minorities in America are gradually closing the racial gaps in areas of mortality and education, while fostering a unique resilience and sense of community. Despite this progress, the rise of tragic mass shootings, deaths of despair, and President Trump's polarizing language present new trials. We must use this moment of division to come together and help America continue on a path towards improvement. So this article was written in February the 27th. Doesn't even mention the coronavirus. I've noted that Australia's preeminent scientific organisation called the CSIRO on the 1st of December apparently issued a warning to our Prime Minister that reporting on the coronavirus in China was indicating that it could be problematic and that preparation would be necessary. And our Prime Minister said that he wasn't going to have a knee-jerk reaction because he's a mini Trump. And Australia has had the benefit of being relatively more isolated than the United States. Less tourism, more isolated from the rest of the world, relatively speaking. But and then we were good at following the bureaucracy initially. Less contrarian people who disobeyed social distancing initiatives. But having done the lockdown, Australia is now suffering from a Prime Minister who is not consistent with his health messaging and who failed to have a national plan to deal with the increased vulnerability of people in nursing homes to the coronavirus pandemic. All right. So Black people, poor Black people, are half as likely to report stress the previous day than poor white people. We also know objectively that they are more resilient to that stress. I've never heard it before. I'm a little reluctant to repeat it because I know a lot of Black Americans say they've experienced medical discrimination at the hands of doctors who claim, well, Black people have a higher tolerance for pain. I mean, surely if somebody's more tolerant for pain, then you take any pain they tell you about seriously because it must be severe, if you already believe that they have a higher tolerance for pain. So I've never understood how that particular justification for racist lack of treatment would work. But you know what? Racist people can often come up with any type of rationalization, no matter how poorly it holds out. The US is the only wealthy country with a rising mortality rate, which is partly due to deaths of despair. Have you heard of what they are before? That's deaths from suicide or opiate overdose, drug overdose, liver damage, etc. People who didn't have to die, but who were so sad that that sadness overwhelmed them and got them to engage in either gradual suicide through self-destructive behaviors such as drug abuse and overeating and literally just committing suicide. All of those things contribute to deaths of despair. They're all categorized medically or in more of an anthropological sense as deaths of despair. Why is there such a huge increase in premature deaths amongst less than college educated white middle-aged people, not middle class? Let's have a look. There is another article. Premature mortality and the long decline of hope in the United States. I'm still seeing this as a function of detachment from reality fostered by Fox News and co. On purpose to exploit gaps in understanding amongst white Americans as to where the blame really lies. The sadomasochism of populist politicians such as Republicans who make things worse for people but feed on people's desire to at least not help their enemies. So, yeah, don't ask for the government to help you. Just focus on how we're promising you that we won't help Black people or lazy people, that we won't give a man a fish because what you should be doing is teach a man to fish, which we also won't be doing. But just feel reassured that there's not going to be any giving out of any fish because that's bad and fosters weakness. So the unemployment in the United States was below 4% in 2018. So why are Americans so despondent? Blue-collar workers have experienced declining incomes as new technologies and skills power success in thriving sectors. Okay. 15% of prime-age males have dropped out of the labor force. Another marker is the surprising amount of support for anti-establishment, anti-immigrant, and xenophobic political agenda intended to incite anger in lieu of proposing realistic remedies, though. Yes, that is an important marker of lost hope, and I would suggest is related to her next marker, which she says, yes, the starkest marker is the rise of deaths of despair, preventable deaths due to suicide, opioid, and other drug overdoses, and deaths related to poor health behaviors. The US is the only rich country in the world where mortality rates are increasing rather than falling. So in my recent work, this author argues that she explores the role of hope or its absence in explaining recent trends in premature mortality. Well, yes, it's also been covered before that counties where there were high rates of deaths of despair are likely to be places with high rates of voting for Trump. So there's some correlation between being middle-aged and white and non-college educated and having decreasing life prospects, more likely to have job loss or have dropped out of the job market, and blaming other people. Blaming people is not a great way to achieve happiness or purpose or to be invigorated. Oh, thank you for the troll alert, Bob. I hope you dealt with it. And Joe Biden's speech was great and really helped to put to rest the BS view of the BS argument of Trump trolls. Oops, I'm supposed to have gotten off the internet now. Do we not have any moderators who can block the troll? Because, I mean, I'd mock him and reject what he says, but I know that sometimes they're just paid to just keep saying things. Hey, look, this is a great, that's a great response to that. Yes, trolls, you're in a cult, whether you're paid or not. Great statement, Norma Jean. You're a good thinker. The point of modern propaganda isn't only to misinform, it's to exhaust your critical thinking. That's one of the reasons why we have this broadcast, is to refresh and renew. Oh, yes, Mr. Ed wants to see my shirt. Check out my shirt, Mr. Ed. K-Hive for Joe. I ordered it a while ago before, it's taken a little while to come, before Kamala won the position of appointee to be vice president nomination. Oh, that's a good question, troll. Cuthbert, who am I paid by? I do have some people who pay me to talk, and I'm quite proud of it. Clearly, I offer something of value. It's not the biggest salary in the world, because I'm fairly niche in my appeal, but I'm hoping to increase that as I increase my professionalism, and I'm intending to have more segments, sound effects, musical effects, and I think tighten the production values. Look at how I've got this beautiful screen behind me now showing this lovely living room with a grand piano in the background. That's part of what I'm doing to advance the appeal of my broadcast. So yes, I'm paid by a couple of Patreons who contribute to defraying the cost of putting this show on. The subscription to a website that allows me to simultaneously broadcast to YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch, and allows me to occasionally purchase things like microphones. Mr. Ed likes my shirt. I'm very glad, Mr. Ed. It's made me realize I do have huge knockers. Huge. I'm not really used to seeing them in new clothes because I haven't bought new clothes for a little bit. But yeah, pretty big. So yes, 57% of Republicans are the death panel they accused Obama of being. Yes. So yes, somebody says holy S because of that. But you know what? Holy S to the whole and continuing endorsement of a president without a plan for addressing coronavirus, who has rode America as hard as he can in the opposite direction, who has crumbled the solidity of any attempts by medical professionals to put a message out there that in the absence of a vaccine, the closest thing to a vaccine is widespread adoption of mask wearing. That is the vaccine. Trump's trying to rush production of a vaccine, meaning that Americans have dropped 10 points over the past few months in their response to pollsters about their willingness to take a vaccine. More and more people are like, oh, not if Trump's in charge of it, because he'll be like the Russians going, yep, we've done stage 1 trials. That's it. Don't really need to test for efficacy or safety. Just, I've got a thing, vote for me. I'm the genius who oversaw an expedited vaccine development process. And most sane people say expedited is not the word we want to hear in association with a vaccine. We want to hear rigor and safety. All right. Why is Candace Owens trending? It's going to be for a bad reason, isn't it? Pressed on the fact that 6 2016 Trump campaign officials have now faced federal charges, senior advisor Jason Miller argued on Meet the Press that overall, the president has had a very good track record of hiring excellent people. And solid people like Kellyanne Conway and Stephen Miller haven't been arrested yet. Oh my gosh, how good would it be for Kellyanne Conway and Stephen Miller to be arrested? Let's hear Jason Miller say that.
I want to ask you about another development that happened late this week involving another member of the president's 2016 campaign. It's somebody that you've worked quite closely with. It's Steve Bannon. I think folks are quite familiar. He's been indicted on what appears to be some, perhaps he misled a charity, may have taken some money that wasn't meant for salaries and things like that for this We Build the Wall. First thing I want to ask, since you did a podcast with him, have you been interviewed at all by the Justice Department in this investigation, Jason?
I have not, and from public reports, it looks like this investigation was going long before the podcast even started, podcast and radio show that I co-hosted with Steve. These allegations are very serious, and I hope that Steve has some good answers for the things that he's been accused of. It's not something that I worked on. I don't know anything about the financial dealings of this organization or how it worked, and I hope Steve has the opportunity to tell his side of the story.
Tell his side of the story.
I want to put up this image here. Quite a few people who were involved in the Trump campaign in 2016 have had some issues with the law. Indictment.
Oh, I'm going to take a picture. Oh, it's so sad that Roger Stone has had his sentence commuted.
Convictions. You know, some of these folks you worked with quite closely: Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Michael Cohen, Roger Stone, all people involved with this 26 campaign team, and some way or the other found themselves on the wrong side of the law. Why shouldn't voters look at this and say the president seems to surround himself with people with shady instincts?
Shady.
I disagree on that. I think you take a look at the great people that President Trump has surrounded himself with, some of the brilliant women and some of the brilliant leaders that we have within this administration, some of our cabinet members. And I would say that overall, the president's had a very good track record of how.
Yeah, that was ludicrous. It's so much of watching Trump spokespeople talk to the media is really like watching Baghdadi Bob, the defense minister of Iraq, who was insisting, no, Americans have been repelled and defeated. And in the background of his speech, there were American tanks rolling past. So much of Trumpism is like watching that happen, but also knowing that there's millions of your compatriots cheering and saying, I personally identify with Trump, and any attack on him I take as an attack on me and intensifies my desire to vote. Now, for that reason, I sometimes think it would be good to put more political ads out against Jared Kushner, attacking Jared Kushner's response to the pandemic crisis, that he was put in charge at one point of the coronavirus response, that he reportedly was working with a team to develop a national testing strategy that they then abandoned because they decided it would be more politically harmful to Democrats if they just didn't have a testing strategy, let people die as a consequence of not testing and isolating who had the disease, or determining who had coronavirus, who the asymptomatic carriers of the virus were, and therefore containing it before it spread broadly across the country. They abandoned that testing strategy, saying, well, it won't be politically useful to us to help Americans, to save American lives. It'll be more politically useful for us if people die, and then blame Democratic governors because we think this virus will be predominantly present in blue states as a function of their higher rates of international travel. And that's been true, but it's more been true initially. So New York has wrestled their coronavirus rate to the ground. They were flying blind for a long time because the president refused to warn Americans. He refused to pass on the intel he was receiving as early as December and January, that there was this big pandemic potentially looming on the horizon that was looking very dangerous in China. He did not ramp up domestic production of masks. He did not organize for the preparation of testing reagents or any type of thing that would be necessary to prepare America. He did not ramp up production of the type of cotton swabs that you need to test for a respiratory pandemic. Thank you, Norma Jean. I'll put that up there so people can see. Nationwide voter information website, canivote.org. I think Joe Biden's campaign also has one as well. Axios has one. I think there's an I Will Vote one as well. But yes, we're spoiled for choice. It's very important to flatten the curve for the United States postal system by requesting a ballot early. So instead of it being a curve that just sharply rises just before election date, that it's smoothed over time and therefore does not exceed the capacity line of the Postal Service. So we don't want this type of curve close to November. This type of curve close to November the 3rd. We want a smoother, softer curve that still covers as many people, but is flattened and shaped and fits under this line of people asking for their, some people asking early for their ballot, not everybody asking all at once at a later stage. So if you can help out with that, please. Bob's getting his ballots on October the 5th. Excellent. Oh, and I'd better go. I did promise my husband to do only a short broadcast today, and I thought that was fair. Trump's attacking mail-in dropboxes. Oops. So now the Democrats are using mail dropboxes, which are a voter security disaster. Lies. Among other things, they make it possible for a person to vote multiple times. Lies. Also, who controls them? Are they placed in Republican or Democrat areas? They are not COVID sanitized. Oh, now he cares about COVID. Hilarious. Hilarious. I've seen it reported actually that when drop boxes are open, there has to be a Republican judge, electoral judge, and a Democratic electoral judge present, which is good. Good that it's formalized. And of course, Trump pretends that it's not, because his job at this point in time, in order to corruptly preserve power, is to try and convince as many people in the electorate to not vote as possible. He's probably having more success managing to convince Republicans to not vote by mail, which means they won't be able to vote as early, which means evidence will continue to build that people are dying of coronavirus and that this is jeopardizing the health of the economy. So in a way, by November the 3rd, Republicans will be even more unlikely to turn up at the ballot box, because the evidence of the pit America is in that Trump dug will have accumulated and will be even more considerable than it is already, which is tragic to say. Yes, things are going to continue to get worse in a lot of American states. Trump will continue to broadcast propaganda as fast as he can to try and convince those Republicans that everything's fine. But as we've seen, 57% of them think it's fine, that the level of coronavirus deaths are fine. 33% are not fine. No. 43% are not fine. That's good. 43% of Republicans, there's hope for them. And if Trump loses the support of even 5% of Republicans, it's very difficult for him to win re-election, which is what the world needs. We need Joe Biden to roll back Trump's rollbacks in relation to methane measurement and methane containment, a gas that's basically makes a coronavirus look like a walk in the park in terms of how many deaths it inflicts on the world. A hard thing to engage with intellectually, but climate change is very lethal, and there's hundreds of thousands of people right now in Africa who are displaced as a result of severe floods. There's a lot of Americans who are going to be displaced as a result of hurricane activity as well. And climate change, climate disasters relate to the amplification of extreme and frequent, amplify and increase the frequency of extreme weather events, such as hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, etc. People are dying, even more people than are dying from coronavirus. And without someone who acknowledges the problem, like Joe Biden, who's prepared to listen to experts who will continue to inform him of the nature of the problem and what can be done to combat it, we need Joe Biden. Why is Hunter Pence trending? What is Hunter Pence? Oh, because Hunter Pence is a sports player. That's good. We don't need any of that. Your ballots can't be mailed until October the 1st because Trump was sued. Pennsylvania was sued by Trump. You voted by Dropbox in front of a police station door, very secure. Yes, Marianne Barry Trump, he has no principles, none. No, he doesn't read. Yes, all true. He probably reads articles that relate to him because he's a narcissist, sociopathic narcissist. Scythe means stepmother. Is that pertinent to anything? All right, chaps. Thanks for being with me this evening. Have a great day. Damn auto-corrupt, indeed. Is the Goodyear blimp flying over the RNC? The RNC hasn't started yet, does it? Has it? Starts on Monday. Thanks for playing, everyone. You're right, that should be my goodbye phrase. Peace out. Thanks for playing, everyone. Thanks. Thanks, Molly. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Norma Jean. Cheers, everyone. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you, Otodo Maru. Awesome. See you again shortly.